doing the same thing that everybody else is doing. Is we want like-minded people to know you're not crazy.
So we have on our podcast today Chris and Flip, and they have their own YouTube channel. They have been on Midnight Mormons, Jonathan Streeter's channel, Thinker of Thoughts, and you guys are pretty active in the...
Flip was on Mormon Expression a bunch of times, and Sunstone a few times. And
Chris went on Midnight Mormons and Streeter, but yeah, I did a few Mormon Expression episodes.
All right. And so I'll link down below like where you can find their channel and make sure I platform them well. So,
I just want to say, I've never once advertised out that channel. Some people come at us, and that's always kind of one of the things I sit back on. Is like, it's getting out where it's getting out. I haven't advertised it once anyway.
I'll let you guys just do a quick introduction. Like, why do you care? Where are you at? Like, what's your story? Chris, go first.
Why do we care? We've been asked that so many times over the years whenever we get into little Facebook.
Well, why are you here? Like, why is your energy here, I guess? Like, so obviously you have some background, like you grew up LDS, I'm assuming. So I just kind of
grew up LDS. I was never a hardcore believer. That's something that I brought before. Like I struggled with it. I struggled with it from a young age. I remember that we used to do I Hope They Call Me on a Mission. I was like 8 years old and something saying, I'm not singing that song. I don't want to go on a mission. And all through high school and all that stuff, I was maybe like a little rebellious in high school. I did not want to go on a mission, but I still ultimately followed all the stuff. I just generally struggled. I struggled with church. I struggled with believing it from a really young age. I ended up going on a mission. I think even in my mission farewell, I said, I don't know that I have very much of a testimony to talk to me in 2 years. I said that in my mission farewell, and you can ask people. But I went out and I kind of felt like I was able to compartmentalize a little bit because I went to Mexico City. Same place Quick from Quick Media went. So we kind of have that in common. We've chit-chatted about it. And on the mission, I remember trying a few times to gain that testimony under the promise. I promised, like one night I tried to pray the entire night. I might have fallen asleep or something with my knees on that couch or something. But to me, it seemed like I was there that whole entire night. And I woke up in the morning and said to myself, did you feel something? No, I don't think I felt anything. And I tried all that sort of stuff. I tried to go through the mission. I have an interview with one of my companions on my channel. You said you've listened to that one. Part of why I put that one up there is because he's there to say that he used to tell me that he got his one of his biggest testimony builders was he knew personally how much I hated the mission and kind of didn't really like it or go along with it, but I still tried my hardest and did my best and got up and did all the rules and followed stuff and tried to go. In my brain, I was kind of able to compartmentalize a little bit. Why, if I was in Spanish, I was able to kind of just run through the testimonies and all that stuff. I don't think I ever once in my life in English kind of gave like a real straightforward testimony. I always kind of had that doubt, and I was always a little bit honest with myself about that. Going out of that, I went into college, got Temple married, all that stuff. Went into college. When I was in college, I did an undergraduate. I did 2 undergraduates, one in public relations, which I actually think comes into play nowadays because so much of what we're living under is corporate places trying to kind of get a conscience about how they're acting in the world, and that's what the PR angle of stuff was. And then the other major that I did was Spanish and Spanish literature, which ended up becoming a second major just for how the timing in school landed. And I ended up graduating top of the class in that area, and the Spanish department there invited me to come on, offering up through a PhD if I wanted it. I just did the MA in Spanish literature, and I taught undergraduate Spanish literature classes and took master's level literature classes, which ended up kind of cross-training us into all sorts of things back in 2002, 3, 4, about a lot of the things that people might call critical social justice nowadays. So I had a really early introduction into it. It was by the time that I started getting into it, and I've been into it ever since. Flip is one of the persons that a lot of people said, you didn't tell us about that. Flip is one of the persons that I kind of tried to start explaining it to all the way back then. and saying,
And
"Yeah,
I
have you
was
heard this stuff? Have you seen this stuff?" Yeah, and because Flip hasn't gotten through college, but he's one of the smartest guys I know. I've met professors and all this stuff. I'd put Flip at professor level intelligence. I've always felt that way about him because I'm not into that credentialism that people have. But the going through that, I just continued studying that stuff. However, probably through those same philosophies, I started falling away from the church. You know, I sometimes would joke back at that time that I didn't care about history, all that stuff. I kind of took a more Foucauldian angle of why I was leaving the church, that it was power and power structures. And in fact, reading about Foucault, writing about the power of the confession was one of my big points of saying this confession stuff is bullcrap and getting out of it from there. So then I slowly backed away from the church. Going through all of that, I ended up finding all the stuff about the history and reading a bunch of it myself. And then beyond that, maybe through Mormon Expressions with John Larson, started hearing a bunch of that. So I grew up in the same ward as Lindsay Hansen Park. We were actually talking to each other quite a bit when she was first leaving. I think, I can't say for sure, but I think I showed her John Larson's podcast. I remember talking back and forth on that. She ended up appearing a bunch of time on John Larson's podcast. That might not be exactly how it went down, but that's how I remember it. And she and I,
timeline,
the beginning of Mormon Expression, the first,
okay.
I don't know.
I'm new to, I mean, I've only been here like a couple of years, right? So I'm like,
yeah. So Mormon Expression was John Larson's podcast. John DeLynn now brings him on all the time. And they've archived his podcast and they offer it at a premium on John DeLynn's channel because back during that time, Larson was winning over DeLynn. Mormon Expression was the bigger podcast, and DeLynn was kind of on his tails.
I see.
And Larson
was still playing faithful.
DeLynn was still playing faithful, and guys like Larson were really critical of it. Even us too. We thought DeLynn was kind of a goof because of that, but DeLynn would still kind of start coming around. So Lindsay Hansen and Larson had that podcast. Flip and I started listening to a whole bunch. We went, I was there live. Here and there, they'd ask me to come on, but if I didn't know the historical subject, I'd say, I don't want to be on the panel. I don't know that subject until I'd learned about it later. Flip, who knows a lot about all that sort of stuff, would just jump right on. And so he ended up on a bunch of those. And he'd talk with Lindsay and talk with Larson. And there was a time frame where Lindsay was talking to me, asking about, they were asking about ideas for a different podcast of steel manning, different ideas that were against them. They were talking to me about that. So I kind of have a history with those guys. Larson, part of what ignited us into finally making a podcast is one night, Flip and I were asked by Lindsay, it was like a Christmas Eve, to go keep Larson company because he's going through a divorce. That divorce is part of what ended Mormon Expression, you know. And so we went and kept them company for a night and just being nice. It was just one night. We chit-chatted that night, whatever, we left.
We played poker. We talked about it a little bit. I remember we talked about due process that night and kind of got in an argument about it. But anyway, that started into a point where I started getting to a point where I started seriously questioning the critical social justice world of academics. And I'd at that point read a ton of it. I'm not underread in the world. I kept going on even after graduate school, reading and continuing that stuff, especially from that side of the aisle. And it's just been a long process. And Flip and I probably for who knows how many years just kind of constantly share with each other almost daily these constant things of like, look at this, look at this, look at this, of stuff that comes out of that world, some of it at the academic level, some of it at the cultural level. And that led into, I ended up resigning from the church, and I resigned right when John DeLynn got excommunicated. And I even wrote in my exit letter or whatever that I thought that they were kind of pushing out people who were trying to make sense of it. And like I've said before, I think that was, I think I was incorrect about that. I think they were actually correct in their decision to move John DeLynn out, because I do think that he pushes beyond just trying to say, hey, accept people who are in the fringes. He tries to change the church, and I think they're justified in excommunicating him for that. Anyway, so then the past 4 or 5, 6 years, we ended up just kind of starting to push back more on the academic religion that I think is out there right now. Flip and I have been there through a whole lot of that. Through that process, at one point, I was pushing back on
I was defending Quick Media because he described some stuff in critical race theory, and he was completely correct because he's read it. And so many of the people who push back on it have not read it. And Quick was correct. He was describing.
He's read it
the
more
people
than the
defending
people
it try to translate it into something that it isn't.
Yeah,
and
the first step of every one of these discussions is to get people to acknowledge that reality exists, which is to say, people wrote this down. They published it as scholarship. They've been citing each other. You know,
Yeah.
like when
there's libraries and
when,
libraries.
When the New York Times say experts say, these are the experts, and these experts publish stuff. You can read it.
You can read what they said, and Quick was representing it correctly, and the people on the ex-Mormon site were saying that's not what it says.
Yeah,
and so I came out.
Times I've quoted the literature and been told that I don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So then I came out and said, no, what he's saying is correct, and then I got swarmed, which has happened to us a million different times for a million different reasons. Yeah. But through that swarming, Jonathan Streeter saw me arguing back with a bunch of people, and that's when Jonathan Streeter invited me on his podcast, because Jonathan Streeter's been reading this stuff and been onto it too for a while because he's interested in how things become culty. He's just put out a website recently about how culty is the thing, and you can review it for gym stuff to gluten to all the way to critical social justice or Mormonism. You can whatever. It's this thing set up to kind of judge whatever sort of thing you believe in. How culty is it? And so Streeter brought me on several different times to kind of discuss and go over this stuff. And he's been reading a lot more of it. I've always been reading all along. Flip's been reading all along, so we've always been kind of poking at it. And I ended up on that. Through ending up on there, I got invited on the Midnight Mormons. I got invited onto Quick Show. I got invited onto these other places. And then, so the reason I brought up that night with Larson is that they were asking for criticism. They were directly asking for criticism. And we had some criticism.
Facebook post or where?
It was both a Facebook post and
live on the show.
Live on the show.
They looked into the camera and said, how are we being political? You know, we want to hear your criticism.
Okay.
So I said, okay, here's the criticism. And so I gave him the criticism and started like describing to him about how, you know, they usually put these straw man things of like, nobody can describe critical race theory or nobody can, and we're like, yeah, we can, you know. And so we started talking to him, and I started under a anonymous name just because it was my basic YouTube name. I started arguing with Larson, and we were arguing back and forth, and I was pointing to him.
And he was on the stream as a viewer then? And that's how you were?
He was the one who was on the stream. He saw me comment on the stream, and then he started talking to me in the comments. Yeah.
Oh, so it was like the actual... So are you sure it was him then?
Yeah. It was, it was his like official thing.
Oh,
and he was arguing back and forth with me, and he was saying, well, what do you have? What do you do this? And I started pointing to him and said, you guys say that you aren't doing this, but you are doing this. And I started pointing to him the different little ways that he was doing the stuff directly as it comes out of the theory.
Like
and that sort of
what was he doing?
So he was talking about, they talk about what wokeism is people need to wake up to have a critical consciousness through a certain type of critical theory. And through that critical theory, they need to see the systemic systems that are problematic and then talk about dismantling those problematic systems. That's just last stream with the Lynn, he said people can't describe what wokeism is, but that's
John Larson says woke doesn't have a definition. It doesn't mean anything. I linked the Merriam-Webster entry on woke, where not only does it give the social justice definition, but even gives a brief history of that usage.
So
and they deleted my comment.
Yeah.
It was literally just the link to the woke.
And so one of the things about that is in those interactions, I've for years been talking with Lindsay Hansen Park to John Larson through Lindsay Hansen Park about these ideas of the other side, very politely, very succinctly saying, hey, they were even talking about, let's start a podcast where we still man your side and we still man your side. And we have a discussion about it. They were talking to me about creating that podcast. And for years we talked back and forth about this stuff. And then it would just kind of start getting more and more and more salty, especially through the Trump era. It would just get saltier.
Right.
This is a long process of getting saltier. And then finally, in this moment, he didn't realize he was talking.
The criticism one. So was timeline wise, was this more recent or was this back?
No,
at the same
that
time?
was 2000. That was pre-Trumpish. Like we were talking that it was right
during
when
that
probably
stream on Facebook where.
Oh, the
that
stream
was recent. Yeah, the stream.
Yeah, it was like a few months ago.
So we are jumping around a little bit. Okay, so
what episode? What?
Oh, there's the Willie Handcart Company one or something like that, where he was talking about you need to be, he even used the word woke, I think, woken to your race, the racist culture that you've been around, even if you think it was, you know, it's just, and then just right in the next breath saying, wokeism doesn't have a definition, or you know, so I'm mischaracterizing that one exactly, but in this thing, I was pointing to him exactly how he was getting it wrong and straw manning another side. And I was talking to him about that, and when I talked to him about it, he said, oh, I don't want to talk about this because I kind of pinned him on the wall about, you give me your definition of what racism is. And then they do the thing that, you know, kind of frequently happens, is they didn't want to continue with it. He said, let's talk about this over beer. And the thing is about Larson, was like, I know that he probably would kind of concede to me the stuff I was saying over a beer, just not in front of an audience in that sort of way.
Also, John Larson's in Oregon, so it's not like we can realistically go have a beer with him.
But anyway, in that moment, I told him who I was. I said, well, we can have a beer or whatever. You know, this is Chris Hanna. You know me. I spent the night over at your house, and we hung out and talked. And I've talked to you through Lindsay Hansen Park for years. And then he immediately changed and said, I know who you are. You stay away from me and my family.
Yeah.
You all this stuff, like painting me like I'm some sort of stalker or something like that.
I've never spent Christmas Eve with anyone that wasn't.
He said the night didn't happen. He said all sorts of stuff, like it was like the biggest deal in the world if that night happened or not. And then he
I went back through my Facebook Messenger thing, and I found where Chris and I
were invited by Lindsay Hansen Park on that night.
Chris sends me John Larson's address.
We pulled the proof of it. I had an ex-girlfriend who went with us that night. She verified it too. She's like,
she was there.
But that's even beyond the point, is that he just immediately went to making me look like trying to make me look like a crazy person.
Yeah.
Like that.
Oh, like, so stay away from my friends and family, like you some kind of.
Well, could it be that he actually thinks you're a crazy person, though? Like,
no, because
do you think he did that in bad faith, or do you think he actually thinks
it was bad
crazy?
Faith? He was lying about the night.
He was lying about the night. That's how we know it was bad faith, because he doubled down by
he tried
lying
to deny
about
that something that really happened.
He said, "I've never let some person in my house, let alone, you know, like something like that."
And, he said, "I've never," because it was a Christmas Eve, and he said, "I've never spent Christmas Eve with anyone but my friends and family." He knew he was lying. Like, we played poker, we drank beer, we had scotch.
I've hung out with him one night, and I don't go around chasing him or pushing him. We were pushing back on that stuff because they asked for criticism.
Maybe he's just trying to.
I understand what you're doing, trying to still man it, and you should.
Yeah.
But it was bad faith. And
it's tough. It's really tough, because I feel like with, like, for example, Midnight Mormons and RFM, I'm so glad that debate did happen, but I feel like there's so many personal things that are said, and it's so hard to actually talk to the person and not their ideas when it's personal like that. You know what I mean? And if he lied,
for sure,
if he lied about something, it's hard not to take it personal, right?
Well, you know how we know it's bad faith? There's a way that we know it was in bad faith, which is we're still here, we're still willing to talk. We still comment.
We accept.
We still try. We accept apologies.
I highly believe in kind of like the game theory thing of, like, if somebody punches at you, maybe you punch back, but then be willing to forgive.
Yeah. No, I made the joke that when John DeLynn and John Larson said, we want to hear criticism, they have exactly as much sincerity as when they say are all opposed, show us by the sign. They don't want to really know about opposition.
And that's part of we called it like 100 Flowers campaign from Mao, is that they want to see who's criticizing so they can cut them out.
Yeah.
And that's what it seemed like to us, at least anyway. But the point of it is that moment probably ignited us into finally, we've been talking for years about starting a podcast, not about them, just for just hanging out and talking and bull crapping.
But you guys do talk about them.
Yeah, but
since forever.
Okay. Like,
but it put the fuel in the fire, for sure. Like, okay, we're gonna do this because, like, if he's gonna, like, be famous about that, and they want criticism, we'll give criticism.
I have my own.
So then we started doing it.
Yeah, I have my own personal, like, stories. I don't know if I want to talk about it publicly, but I've told you about, like, being blocked from certain things, and I'm just, and it's hard. Yeah, it's really hard to not take personal, like, especially when you think you're a part of that group and you're trying to help. You're trying to actually help them be less biased so that they can be more convincing to all sides, right? Like, that's
maybe to help.
It's hard not to take it personally.
At the same time, too, helping the people they're straw manning, because, like, I don't think they go about creating a better world for the way they straw man the other side.
5 or 6 years ago, and Chris was there for all of this, because this is a perfect segue. 5 or 6 years ago, I was permanently banned from the ex-Mormon Facebook group, the one called Exmormon. And it was for
the one with a really great thing about The
I-
Godfather, and
It's been a long time. I don't know, because
Godfather?
again, this is
Sorry.
this is how long I've been in this scene. Is that
Yeah.
this has been 5 years, but somebody posted, and like this isn't an exact quote, but it was something very close to this. She said, "I'm a recruiter for my company. I see all of these resumes come past my desk that cite BYU and MTC as experience."
I mentioned
Shake
this
my
one
head.
when I was on the Midnight Mormons. I
Right.
mentioned this one, and some people asked, "Did that really happen?" Well, this is Flip who was there for it.
And I was the first commenter, and I said something to the effect of, imagine if these were Muslim candidates, and instead of BYU and MTC, you said madrasa and mosque. You're just being a bigot. And boy, did that set off a 3-day flame war where
Yeah.
it was terrifying and
There's
Is
a
that
reason I
all you
brought it.
said? Is that all you, or did you stop?
No,
right there?
we went.
You kept
no,
going.
well, because I
No,
started, I mean, I
Flip
kept
got
going.
banned for calling
got-
for using the
After
word
3
bigot.
days, because it was after 3 days, and like I was even linking the word bigot. And what's amazing is all of the people who are like, no, we're not being bigots. Mormons really are all stupid and dumb. That's not bigotry to hate Mormons if they're really dumb. Like, and it really got that stupid. Meanwhile,
It was a
Chris is
long,
behind
stupid
the
thread.
scenes. Yeah, and Chris is behind the scenes saying, like,
But-
fellow
but-
HR professional to other fellow HR professional, what you're doing is illegal. You
So
need-
that
you need to
woman
knock
who
that
started
off,
the thing, she
you know?
talked to me. She talked to me directly, and to not throw her under the bus, she apologized for it. She said I shouldn't have said that.
Indirectly,
I didn't want
but-
this to. I didn't want this to all blow up into this.
The
and
person that
I'm not-
originally made the comment.
the one who made the OP. Yeah.
She's like,
But yeah,
that's not.
like-
That's not. I don't want to.
I
Really
said I
stand
didn't
by
mean
that.
this. I didn't want to go. But the thing is, like, the
Yeah.
thread just flew
Yeah.
off. You know,
Oh,
she
interesting.
didn't want it.
And
to keep
because what
Well,
she
going.
and I
did
would
was
also-
extremely, it was highly inadvisable. But
Mhm.
you know what she did. It turns out bigotry is a human. It's kind of a natural
Sure.
thing. People seem to
Tribalism.
kind of-
That's
yeah,
something
geared
else I
to
brought
that.
up on the Midnight Mormons. We just had it happen again on another journalist where they got a new construed definition of bigotry. That's a brand new definition that popped up in the year 2020. Flip used to love to point to people what the actual definition of bigotry was before ideologues changed it, and that
Well,
was
and like
one of
other
the moments. But
definitions,
he
funny
got
'cause-
kicked off of there for the word he used. The word that they cited saying that he got kicked off there for was bigot.
And even though, yeah, and of course, and they use
For
that
calling
word
someone a
all
bigot.
of the time. Yeah,
Mhm.
and bigot is one of the most commonly used words in that group. But it's as long as you're calling Mormons bigots, they can do it all
And not
day
a
long.
person,
Even-
and not a person in the group.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
And to contrast this, because I forget, because I remember much earlier when I was like, come on, guys, and I think it was the same group. It was probably the exact same group. But somebody down in Utah County, in what was clearly an upper middle class neighborhood, took a photograph of a cul-de-sac with a whole bunch of cars parked, and complaining that the local ward choir had gotten together to rehearse. And they're like, "What? Why do they have to do this at 3:00 on a Sunday afternoon?" And I'm just like, and I just remember commenting like, "Those monsters." Those animals. Like, really? This is your complaint, that people get together and sing on Sunday afternoon? Would you rather live up by the university where it's frat boys throwing parties until 3 a.m.?
Sure.
Like,
So-
your complaint is
Well-
nice people in nice clothes.
But
getting together
let
and
me
singing nice
just
But that
let me
is
just
the
say
worst.
this.
That's the worst. That is the worst of where people get to. And I would argue that John DeLynn would not say it's okay to discriminate on a resume based on Mormonism, right?
Yeah,
Like,
that's probably true of John
so-
DeLynn. I bet
That's-
Larson.
I'm just saying
in one
it's
of the
not good to
episodes that we
compare,
pulled up.
our best with other people's worst.
Okay,
Like, that
we
is the worst that can
reviewed-
happen for sure. But nobody, I don't think generally people would defend that. They're like, ooh, that's
Okay,
too far.
the
but we
ex-Mormon-
reviewed on our channel. We reviewed one of John Larson's episodes where he says right out. We pull it out. We watch it. We review it. Where he says people who are basically grounds workers at BYU are complicit in LGBT suicide.
Yeah.
And they should quit their jobs and drop all their sorts of stuff. And we are not exaggerating that.
So
We
you're
got
saying
it.
they
we got it
can, they
on my
can get
channel.
that extreme.
He says they
on-
should
on
sacrifice
Larson
their
that
does.
lives.
podcast.
Yeah.
I see.
I would say
But also,
Larson does, but
As
it's
far
not
as the
DeLynn.
groups are
But
concerned,
he's
'cause I
on
can tell
DeLynn.
you, in those many times when I've gotten in these specific types of arguments on ex-Mormon groups, I almost never get support. It's almost
agree.
entirely
And I agree.
people who are taking the bigotry line.
I feel the same way. And like
Let me
someone,
just say, I don't think we'd even have a channel if all we got back from Larson was like, "Oh, that's a good point." Yeah, we probably just wouldn't even started.
Yeah, we would
Yeah.
be doing other things.
No, I agree with you. In fact, I was on ex-Mormon Facebook group, and someone put a screenshot of this mom that it was like, I didn't have a Moses experience, and so I was feeling bad that women don't get to have Moses experience. And then she goes and she flips it and she basically says, but I realized I do have Moses experiences in this, and this part of my life. And they were kind of traditional, like mothering type times. Right. And so this woman just like, oh my gosh, she can't see that she's like being used and abused. And this makes me sick. And I read that and I was like, this is a woman who has a goal to be the best mother that she can be. And you are basically not, she was
So
basically saying she has internalized sexism in her
Yeah.
post.
yeah.
And I'm like, that's one of the worst things to me when someone
Yeah.
says, I believe this. And then the counter side will say, oh, you don't actually believe that. You're just
Yeah.
brainwashed. Or you
Yeah,
don't
exactly.
actually believe that. That really bugs me. And I
but
tried to defend.
you'd have to
people.
wonder
Yeah,
what the
well,
You know what I
psychology
mean?
of somebody is who can't believe that motherhood can be rewarding in and of itself.
Yeah. And
Like they reject that idea,
anytime,
which is it's
yes,
creepy, it's
and
scary.
when someone admits to like struggling and then coming around and then finding peace in some way through the church or through a scripture or something,
Yeah.
then that is somehow internalized sexism. And it's like, no, actually, people's goal is to be a good mother, and they have a hard time. And here she is being like open and honest about struggling, and
No,
yeah.
don't you see?
and
She's upholding systems of oppression. She's
yeah, and
perpetuating the idea that women exist only to have babies and blah.
yeah. And
Well,
I was just a little bit irritated that it irritates me when someone says, this is my perspective, and then someone else dismisses that perspective as like, it's not a credible perspective. Like,
Yeah.
because
so let
No,
me
it's
just
also
finish
kind of
up, and then you should go into like what Flip's history is. But I
yeah.
just want to say that Flip and I have a huge track record of being just as salty to Mormon busybodyism.
Sure.
We have a
Oh,
huge
boy.
track record of that. That I'm
That-
sure all the ex-Mormon people would be completely fans of.
On
But
board
I
with,
do
right.
think I think we do try to pick out when people are being busybodies. I think that is what we ultimately try to go after,
Yes,
and then
but
we
are
do
you
try
guys
to.
being busybodies? We'll come to that later.
Well,
Sure.
Go ahead.
I mean, that's because one way I can summarize this is that all of my complaints about John DeLynn and Mormon stories, like everything I don't like about John DeLynn is everything I don't like about church. It's a perfect overlap.
That's what
Okay.
that's ultimately what it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
It's
but
And my husband would
it's
say that's what he
finger
doesn't like
wagging
about your guys' channel.
moralizing. I don't like
Just
finger
kidding.
wagging moralizing based on bad pseudo intellectual sophistic faith based premises. Like I don't like that crap.
Sure.
And like you're welcome to go off and do it on your own, but you can't tell me that I'm any kind of bad person because I'm not on board with you. That's emotional blackmail. You can go to hell. I don't go for that.
Yeah. All right.
So what's fun is that for my story, ironically, we could just do a teaser and send people over to DeLynn, but if it costs money, I don't want to. But I did a Mormon Stories Voices on the Mormon Expression podcast. He had a sister podcast, The Voices, where it was just exit stories, and I did mine.
Unless he takes his that channel off. No, just kidding.
I don't know if it's there. I have no idea how to find it, but I don't know. We'll do this quick. I had kind of a different upbringing, Mormon wise, in a lot of ways. One was because, like on my dad's side, patrilineally, it was Mormons right back to like 1830s. Really early. They're peppered all over church history, and also because growing up, like a lot of the really spicy historical stuff that when I was a missionary in Northern California where it was a lame place to be a missionary because basically everybody already had an opinion on Mormons because Mormons had been there almost as long as they had been in Utah by that point. And so we'd go tracting and people would bring up all kinds of historical stuff like polygamy and Mountain Meadows and blood atonement and all that crap. And, we'd be walking away and my companion would be saying like, oh, I can't believe the lies anti-Mormons will come up with. And I'd be like, well, no, that's not a lie. Like, that's true. It's not our faith, but like that stuff happened. And it was because for me, like growing up, Mormon history was family history. Like 2 of Joseph Smith's plural wives were my great-great aunts. That most commonly cited journal entry where Benjamin Franklin Johnson, he's my great uncle, he describes how Joseph's approached him about marrying his sisters and all that crap. You know, like they wrote some of the hymns, and so Nephi Johnson was one of the was a lieutenant at Mountain Meadows. He was one of the perpetrators. Joanna Brooks, you know, cites an old family story about, you know, on his deathbed, his last act was to start up from his fever dream and scream blood, 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 and he died. So like all this stuff, I just grew up with all that on that side. Then meanwhile, my mom is a convert and an immigrant from Brazil, so I had the whole convert thing smashed in there too. So that's part of it, but also like I don't know, I never had the faith thing in me. Like praying never worked for me. Like kind of like Chris Hanna said, like, you know, I tried the praying thing and I had to admit nothing ever happened. And how I, like, you know, when people ask me like, why aren't you Mormon anymore? Like Mormons say, why aren't you Mormon? I used to, like, the shortest answer I can give is I no longer accept faith to be a reliable epistemic. You know, that's
do you not think that, like, when you go down to the bottom of your epistemology, you base it off of faith at some point?
Well, perhaps. Like, I guess ultimately, as far as you dig down far enough and you'll reach one of those, well, I don't have an answer things. But I believe this on faith. I can't do that anymore, you know? And I basically became an atheist.
Level, anyway.
Yeah, at the Mormon level. Like, I became an atheist in that, like, you know, I just like, I realized, you know, like the Richard Dawkins argument was that, you know, God is an unnecessary factor. Like you can explain everything without God just as easily as with, you know, and you know, since then I've evolved to the point where, you know, it's actually something John Larson said way back in the day, was that like it doesn't matter. Like for me, the real answer to is there a God is it doesn't matter. You know, like whether there is or isn't makes no difference. But I don't believe in a God. But another thing about my ex-Mormon journey that was a little bit different, because, and I should say I was excommunicated 21 years ago, and I would say like, you know, and that was for wickedness, and you know, I never felt bad. I shouldn't say I felt bad about it. I felt guilty for my wickedness. But you know, a lot of people were like, "Aren't you mad at the church for throwing you out just for having sex with a girl?" And I was like, "No, I broke the rules. Rules are the rules. I broke the rules."
Wait, you
you
can get excommunicated for?
He was a missionary.
I was 2 days from the end of my mission. Yeah, you can go dig it up on the Mormon Expression Voices.
That's
They tell the whole story there. But most, like, you know how they kind of say, it's
I wonder
almost a
how many
trope,
missionaries would be excommunicated if their extra sexual relations were known. Like,
oh
you
yeah,
weren't there,
no,
like, you know, I
that's
don't
part
know.
of the problem. I confessed. It's like
Right.
I didn't get caught. I turned myself in.
Oh, that's interesting. That's
Yeah.
crazy. Okay.
But that's things because I always had the attitude of like, well, I made the promise, and the promise you got to go through the thing. You know, I was very kind of matter of fact, kind of autistic about it. You know, because a lot of people, like a lot of other, like my Mormon friends, were like, "Why'd you tell?" I'm like, "Well,
because they're supposed to be
that's
honest.
how it works."
Yeah.
You know, like, but I never went through the kind of tropey moment that like everybody, you know, where you go through your anti-religion phase. Like I was never anti-church, and I never had this idea that, oh, we got to tear it all down, it needs to be destroyed.
Everybody else must see what I. Everybody else must see what I see.
Exactly. Yeah, everyone else like because you know, like
you never went through an angry phase, huh?
No, not at all.
Not even a little. Like I feel like I was fighting.
No, I did a little bit, but I still never. I didn't push it on people, but if people came at me, I'd fire back.
No, like I was always, for me, it was always kind of matter of fact.
I definitely went through it. Like I definitely went through it, and I also, I was fighting it the whole time. Like I didn't want to go through it. Like I didn't want to be that stereotypical, like, well, why can't you just leave it alone, right? Like
that's probably the critical personality difference between your type and a Delin type, is that Delin embraced the hate.
Maybe.
You know, I looked at the Darth Vader, the Emperor thing. Let the hate flow through.
So
you're Luke Skywalker.
I need to say this because I haven't said it on any other podcast, but I've said a few times that I kind of technically was almost temple worthy for many years when I was post-Mormon. And that's because I would date a Mormon girl, and I tried to work stuff out with this Mormon girl. And whenever I was dating her, I was on the spot with everything, but I still just couldn't believe it. Right. And so I tried to make sense of it. I tried to make it work. I tried to get because I was pretty crazy about her, and I still just told him it was honest and said I can't make it work because of this. and I was following all the stuff to be almost, you know, not almost, I mean, it was temple worthy whenever I do that. But that whole phase, and I started dating her almost right at the beginning of my exit, you know, so that whole phase kind of helped curb me off of trying to see it differently, of dating somebody who was very religious. But I ultimately landed on the point, like, I can't work it out if you're going to be that intense about it to her, and we couldn't work it out. But, and that also kind of brings out why I've said a couple of times that I've been almost temple worthy, and then other times I'll talk about that I've tried drugs and stuff like that. It's because there was a time frame that I was with her that I was almost temple worthy, and then there was other time frames where I have not been temple worthy.
Well, and I would say the reason I haven't, fundamentally, I believe that taking as much responsibility as you can. I mean, it was Jordan Peterson that actually gave me the courage to say what I think, and I didn't think that Joseph Smith did what he claimed to do. Like, I don't believe in that. Like, and so it was Jordan Peterson that gave me the courage to say what I was thinking and stop pretending that I believe something I didn't. And
I was the ultimate proof of
propagating things that I didn't think I had a good, you know what,
So
like, I'm parenting my kids, right?
I have ultimate hardcore proof of trying to do that, because so many Mormons will say you just wanted to sin or want to do that sort of stuff. I lived a celibate, very clean life for on and off for many years, trying to work it out, and then I just couldn't come to agreeing on the ultimate belief part, and we couldn't work it out because of that, and it was just that.
Yeah, but because of Jordan Peterson's influence, I've been convinced that taking responsibility, and then I've practiced that, and I feel much healthier, and it gives me more control in my life than to say, well, the church did this to me. And it's like, well, no, I had some chances where I could have confronted the dragon, and I chose not to, and the dragon got bigger, right? Like that's the analogy that makes more sense to me. And it I don't know. So I was fighting it, but it's that spirit of resentment and bitterness was definitely there. And
there's something that you actually you
Anyways.
pointed this out to me, and this is probably a truth. Flip and I both have half of our lives out now, and we didn't spend a lot of our adult life in it, and that probably alters our perception a little bit.
Yeah,
For
and
sure. I've been
and-
out for 21 years now, and I'm 42.
yeah, and I guess I just have a lot of compassion for people that are in a phase like that, like, and I hope they don't live there forever, because I think you can get stuck there, and that's what I think.
But
and so, but I'm not super
the
judgmental
thing
of
is,
it
though,
either,
is like,
because that you have no idea how strong that drive is to just, especially when they're gaslighting you and they're like, we didn't try to keep this from you, and you go bring up the talk that the mantle is far greater than the intellect, and you're like, really, you didn't try to hide this from anybody? Like, I'm sorry, you were not being forthright and honest, and you're supposed to be.
It's hard to describe, and Flip and I think we see so eye to eye on it, and it's almost kind of like we see so eye to eye on it, and we haven't talked about it. Why do we see it? We see all sorts of salty things about Mormonism that we have no problem with. Tons and tons and tons and tons of it. In fact, we'd promote it or put it on the podcast. Flip says salty stuff about Mormonism on my podcast all the time. All the time. We are not anti-saltiness about Mormon things.
You guys do a really good job of stepping on all the cows, so you have no viewers. Good job.
Yeah,
That's what I'm
exactly.
trying to do. Just kidding.
No, for me, it was part of the anger thing. Like, because I mean, obviously, there's a lot of things that go into not being Mormon anymore. But one of the things for me that like really stuck with me a lot was when I went on my mission.
Okay.
Was
go back to Flip.
Because I've said for a long
I away from you.
I felt for a long time. Well, no, it's fine. It's not terribly interesting, but I felt for a long time. I've wondered, that if I had gotten the fondest desire of my heart and been sent on a weird, wacky speaking foreign missionary in a strange place, if I would still be Mormon, because I went to Northern California, and so it basically felt like going to San.
I speak Spanish. I went to second language acquisition in grad school. If there was a person on this planet who should have been given the hardest language to speak, it's Flip.
Yeah.
Flip is blessed with the gift of language.
I would have, I mean, I do it for fun, and I would have easily done it for God. But the thing is, because I went to basically America, just slightly less Mormon. So to try to tie this back in, I grew up in a really screwed up family, and Mormons obviously push family, and that's the big push. And like I went on my mission in 1999. And which was like, when did the proclamation on the family come out? Like a couple of years before that. You know, that was our primary proselytizing thing. It was our most effective pamphlet, all this crap.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, here I am as a missionary, and I am going inside. I see the inside of 1,000 homes, and I see all these Mormon homes, and I see all these non-Mormon homes, and I see, you know, suburban Mormon homes, and I see rural Mormon homes and non-Mormon, you know, the combination of everything. And like the whole time I'm kind of just taking like an informal personal survey. And I realize Mormon families aren't any different on the whole than non-Mormon families. I couldn't see anything there, you know, and which was like the number one thing we were pushing was like, well, we family, you know, and like a kind of a similar thing was that like when I saw how like the mission office, when I went into the mission office, like, and I'm not sure exactly what I was expecting, but I very quickly realized like that it was indistinguishable from any other job or school or business or anything else I'd ever been involved in, you know, and like, and people are making dumb decisions, counterintuitive decisions, bad ones, you know, but mostly that thing about like just going around and seeing a society that was basically, you know, American white middle class, except I grew up in the Salt Lake Valley, but then I just went one time zone over to where it was like I say, it was like Sandy but less Mormon, and I could see no discernible difference. Mormons were no different other than their particular beliefs. But so I said that too long, but I think you get my point. You know,
Well, I
that was a
actually had
big
that
part of.
same realization when I got into presidency callings. In my head, I was like, oh, I really believed God's directing callings and directing, you know, that is the person pulling the strings is God, like at
Yeah.
every organization in the church. And when I got up into a presidency calling, I was like, we would pray to put someone in a calling, and then the bishop would trumpet, and there didn't seem to be any, like, it was just being ran like a business. It wasn't being directed by God. It was being directed by people's, like, it was being directed by people,
So
just like
You know,
a business.
I do have a good story actually, because I'm talking about this. I haven't told these stories in a while, but I can remember the moment that my faith in priesthood authority just kind of went, poof, which was at sort of, I was probably about 6 months into my mission. I had a companion that was just, for a million reasons, he had a lot of issues, and he shouldn't have been on a mission for all kinds of emotional things, and he made my life hell. And my mission president, God bless him, like he was a wonderful man, but a terrible president as far as managing people was concerned. And I was in my my every 6 weeks you have your interview with the president, and I was trying to talk to him about my companion who was like breaking my stuff, throwing things, and causing all kinds of problems, and packing up to leave, and and I was just and that thing's like I'm 6'3" and 250 pounds. This guy was 6'5" and 300 pounds. Like I was actually afraid of this guy, and I'm getting nowhere with the president. And at one point I say, President, I can't control how people react. And he says, maybe that's your problem, Elder Johnson. And I said, I need to control how people react. And he smiled and nodded. And I went, okay, let's pray. We're done. And so that was like part one. And then immediately after that, I said, President, that BMW of yours, is that a 6 or an 8? Because I had heard rumors early on that the mission president had brought his BMW Z3 sports car with him, which he was obviously not supposed to do. And one day I had gone to the mission home, and because I had been told, I'd been tipped off, go to the garage, you'll find a sports car there. And I went and I saw it. So I'd already seen it. And I said to President, President, that BMW, is that a 6 or an 8? He goes, what are you talking about, Elder Johnson? I said, President, the BMW, the Z3, is that a 6-cylinder or an 8-cylinder? He goes, what's a cylinder, Elder Johnson? And I'm like, oh, okay. Like, so not only do you not talk to God and give terrible advice, but you're also breaking the rules and smiling about it just like everyone else, and that really was a key moment where I'm like, oh, there is no priesthood authority, is nothing special. It's a job title. That's just that.
Yeah, but let me jump off of that to say one of my things about coming out of the critical theory religion, as I call it, is realizing that those societies, compared to other societies, were very, very good societies, including this Mormon one in the 90s in Provo in Utah, and they weren't perfect. Nothing was ever going to be perfect from the start. But the critical social justice world about them has a very skewed view of what the whole entire thing is, or that Mormons were, creating the point of view that Mormons were particularly extra super bad and that sort of deal.
Well, I've listened to Telltale. He's an ex-Jehovah's Witness, and he talks about how Jehovah's Witnesses are just the nicest people, but there's a caveat. They're nice to their own kind. They're really not that charitable to people outside. And so if you're talking about 90s Utah, most everybody is Mormon. And so are they being nice because they're part of the same group? And we do have the whole tribal thing. It's like, we'll be nice to people in our own group.
It's not
like,
perfect, but compared to what society?
Well,
that's always the Thomas Sowell question.
Yes,
so I have an anecdote about this.
All I'm pointing out is that, like, if someone would someone that was Christian in the 90s in Utah have that same feeling, or would they feel ostracized?
So
ostracized, but could they survive and thrive in that society in a very liberal way?
Maybe.
When I was
yes,
so
they absolutely could.
My best friend growing up was raised basically atheist in Holiday, Utah.
Okay.
And like, he was my age, and he had a little sister, and they had only ever been, in fact, they are in fact direct descendants of William Clayton. But anyway, they were both raised basically atheists, never had any religion in Holiday, Utah. I asked my friend, the boy, what was it like? How did the Mormons treat you? Like, what was it like in junior high and high school? And he said, like, sometimes they would ask, I would say no, and it was no big deal. One of them gave me a Book of Mormon. I took it home. I tried to read it. It was boring, but yeah, no big deal. No, and he basically had nothing to say. I asked his little sister, and I said, how did the Mormons treat you? And he said, they were evil. They were so bad. They were, but the thing is, they were talking about how the boys acted and how the girls acted. Now, granted, we're talking about teenage girls, so there's we have to carve that out. But, just there, I mean, same place, same time, just boy or girl, you'll have radically different experiences.
Also different personalities, I'd argue. I think if you have like a stoic personality, you're going to be able to look at it more like Chris is saying, where it's like you can still thrive. But there are some people where maybe a part of their personality needs to be accepted by the broader community, and they're going to struggle.
Well, but still, the Salt Lake, because so much of ex-Mormon world, Larson comes from rural Utah. Deline comes from Houston. Even the Midnight Mormons are coming from California, Canada, and all that stuff. I'm sorry, Salt Lake City was liberal. It was liberal. It was 50-50. Yeah. My friends were 50-50 believers and non-believers. And it was almost kind of like, I review it. It wasn't great on the gay stuff for sure. But
except
that's because of what society was yet at that point.
But ironically,
at the same
East
point,
High was the first gay club.
East High School, yeah. And that was my senior year. But
the magic of it was that you just said it was 50-50.
Yeah.
And you go out into the rural Utah, it's not 50-50, and that's where people
and I'm sure it was tougher and rougher, but that's also, you're getting a skewed view of what Mormonism is, because I would say the center of Mormonism was Provo and Salt Lake, Utah. And Provo and Salt Lake, Utah, I'm sorry, since the 90s, it's been a liberal bastion. And that's even one of my largest complaints with the Lynn and Larson these days, is like, you guys are coming at people who are way closer to you than you think. Yeah. And why you're going around painting them that way is just mind-blowing to me. That my parents are closer to the Lynn than they are to me.
Like the super conservative rural Mormons absolutely exist, and God bless them, they grow all the food. But yeah, the vast population of American Mormons are suburban, moderate.
It's who the Midnight Mormons are critical of. And if I come on in kind of good faith to the Midnight Mormons, but if I was to push on them, I think the Midnight Mormons depict suburban Salt Lake Mormons in a way that's detrimental to Mormonism. I think that society was a very open, very pluralistic, very almost as pluralistic as all societies through all history, which nobody ever does comparisons through all things. Yeah. It's one of the most pluralistic societies in history ever.
Yeah, no, I realized in the last few years that I think the peak of openness and acceptingness in American society was 1997.
Yeah, because the progressivism is going.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it peaked with the Seinfeld. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
And Salt Lake, I'm in a band. We have a joke about it, but one of my songs I write is about how Salt Lake City people are trying to pretend like they get it. And that's my joke about them the whole time. They pretend like they're NPR friendly. And I call them NPR Mormons or Mitt Romney Mormons. And that's what they've always been. That's what I've known them as for 20 years. Like that guy who writes in the Atlantic, the vast majority of that central hub of Mormonism is trying and has been trying to pretend like they get it. And they're far more on the critical social justice side they are now than on the anti-woke side.
Yeah, that's
The
my mission.
The average in that area.
My mission that was very interesting was that, like, you know, I spent probably about half of it basically in the suburbs of Sacramento. So, you know, pretty left-leaning and Democratic. And then I spent about half of it in very Republican rural Mormon land. And you know, that was
Where was
another
that?
like Redding, specifically the place I'm thinking about was Cottonwood. Anderson is south of Redding, you know, and like, because you know, because I remember to this day, there was one day that a priesthood meeting got hijacked into a 45-minute conversation about gun rights, you know, but that was in a cattle ranch in town, you know, but like, whereas, yeah, as
It's
I
hard
went
to
south,
paint it as one big thing, though, right? Because there are all these pockets of very different things.
yeah, well, no, and that's another thing that I learned, that because like, I don't know, because I still get in this fight with both Mormons and ex-Mormons alike. I still have this fight with the whole Utah Mormon versus not Utah Mormon thing. Because I went out there, everybody told me that. And like, you know, for example, one of my area changes, I literally moved down the road. Like it was a mile down the road. It was the next ward over in the same stake. And it was night and day between those two. Even though like it was literally like going from Sandy to Draper. You know, that's what I'm talking about. Like same thing, like socioeconomically very similar and all that, and yet one ward was super awesome, faithful, great membership, lots of activity, and the other one was a nightmare of toxicity. Go figure.
Yeah. Well, the wards I grew up in were super open. My dad's first counselor, my dad was a bishop. His first counselor, his son came out as gay after the mission. All the counselors and the bishops and all that stuff went to his gay wedding. And that's my parents are glued to MSNBC all day, and my dad's a stake patriarch. And that's the average of the people that they live and grow around. And that it's just such a thing that's not even represented. And I've kind of made this joke, and that's the other part of our channel. I do that more with Kevin, but we're going to do it now with Flip and Jared, because Kevin's a believer who I do shows with, and Kevin and I have spent more time looking at how BYU is going woke, and the quick media level of stuff, and how the religious side is getting into all this stuff. And you got Deland, who's coming at them as if they're all MAGA crowd, whatever. Whereas I think this NPR BYU Mormon is one of the huge misrepresentations that's coming from that Mormon Stories channels, that BYU is way closer to Deland, and they're doing this Hegelian dialectic, and they're all aiming at the same place, and they're going to arrive there. And
you know,
yeah, it's like
to wrap
they're
up
going to get there. They're going to get to the same place.
Right.
The thing.
Yeah, you wrap up your thing.
To wrap up my thing though about the nature of wards, I can say also that like from my limited experience, the best wards are the ones that have a nice cross section. Like the ward I'm thinking of was really interesting because it was a college town, so it had like this little dense liberal scholastic you know, middle class element to it, but it was also very rural. It was an agricultural area. And then there was also like, so the ward had like farmers, professors and students, a multi-millionaire who made a fortune creating genetic strains of rice, you know, so like there was some money there too because of like the university and grants and stuff. And then also like our ward incorporated a subsidized housing thing and a retirement home, and that was absolutely the best, most vibrant ward I was in. It was the happiest ward I was in, you know. And that's things like just my little what I saw is that the more monocultural your ward is, the worse it is. It's
Well,
good to have that nice, good cross section of everything.
That makes sense. That backs up. Well, that reinforces my belief, because it's like I like Jonathan Haidt's work, and he kind of makes the claim that we're really terrible at coming to truth on our own, and we have to actually have people that oppose our ideas to bring us closer to the truth. And it seems like a good ward, if you say good, it's going to be a ward that is aligned closer to reality and closer to the truth. And you're going to have that when you have opposing someone you trust that is willing to be like, you're kind of off track there.
Yeah.
And that makes sense. Yeah.
We all need to push back, but
Yeah.
some of us are ready to hear it and some of us aren't, and I guess it depends on the subject. But.
Right. Okay, Flip, did you finish? Like, okay, where did we get to?
I don't know. I don't know where we are. You're driving this train.
No,
How did you get?
How are you at where you're at? I think we totally went off on a tangent.
I don't think Flip was this when I met him 20 years ago. You know,
Yeah, I think so.
He hasn't changed his
don't think you've
politics at all. I was far more like, you met Flip got sort of semi like famous by arguing with this Christian on regular radio, on regular daytime radio, and he became like Flip the atheist, and he'd be on this regular radio station. We got invited to go have like a dinner with them, and we had a dinner with them, and this was before Mitt Romney's election or something like that. And they got up to pray.
Yeah, it was when
he got up to pray. And he got down.
Against.
I got this mega church guy to get up and pray for Obama, because I asked him, like, why aren't you praying for Obama? You should get up there and pray for Obama. And he got up there and he prayed for him.
Yeah.
What was that guy's name?
Stu Epperson. If you look the Truth Network, Truth Talk Live, the Truth Network, Stu Epperson. It's a nationally
national.
It's like they're based in, I think, I don't know, somewhere back east. But yeah, like
That's funny.
Just one day I was driving around, and I had a job that had me driving around, and I was listening to the radio, and I mean, again, just my nature, I have always, I don't know, one of the things that drives me nuts
is we hear something that we don't agree with, and we say something. That's all.
One of the things that drives me so personally crazy about like the Delin wokey types is that, like, for them to deign to lecture anybody about openness, diversity, the importance of investigating claims you don't believe, for them to deign to talk down to anybody about that is already insulting enough. But to do that to me is just triple unbelievable insulting, because like I'm a multi-ethnic, polynational, or multi-ethnic, multilingual, polynational, child of an immigrant, and I spent years listening to Christian talk radio until I felt like I had heard everything they had to say. And it was specifically because I disagreed with them that I listened to so much. And my friends would think I was crazy. But yeah, one day I was listening and they said, we want to hear from atheists. Yeah, we want to hear from atheists. And so I called them up and I talked to them, and I ended up going back on the show a few times. And yeah, we got invited to this fundraiser, and it was just brilliant because everybody got up, because it was during when Mitt Romney was running against Obama. And it was just funny because everybody's going up there. There's like, I know he's a Mormon, but we got to pray for Mitt, And it was just brilliant. It was just beautiful because after we're all just talking together, and Chris had us like, Obama's the president now. Shouldn't we pray for him? And so he shamed them.
He gets back up. Yeah.
They fired off like a quick prayer for Obama. It was the best thing.
Yeah. This was the fundraiser for Mitt Romney in Utah for the evangelical Christian crowd. And I got him to pray for Obama at it. Yeah.
That's funny.
But yeah, how do I get here? I don't know how I got here.
Well, okay. The last thing I remember
Flip's
when you were talking,
here.
you got excommunicated. I think you got up to that point, and then
so like
and kind of described.
I can tell this story. So I went through a period of, in fact, I can tell. I can sort of put this thread together. So I got excommunicated, and they gave me the letter and the list of things to do, and I can't remember because I left the stake center. And I drove straight to Walmart and I bought boxer shorts. And then I went home and I took off my garments. And I do remember feeling an almost religious sense of relief, like an almost physical sensation, taking off my garments and going, this is a weight off of me. But so I had weekly meetings with my stake president, who was awesome, by the way. That's another thing I get to say against the ex-Mormons for my personal story, is that I know and I believe and I have met the terrible leadership that is out there. But I can say that my leadership was excellent to me. In fact, they went far beyond what anybody would expect for me. So, but anyway, my stake president, like 6 months into these meetings, I remember saying to my stake president exactly these words. I said, President, I haven't turned my back on the church, but I just don't want to do it right now. And he said, okay. And that was the last time I ever went to church in any formal way. And then, you know, a few years of just kind of kicking around, like I became, you know, basically less and less faithful. Like I just, you know, because I still kind of believed in a God, but I got to kind of a deistic place. And then, yeah, it was lame as it is. It was reading The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins after reading a whole bunch of other stuff. But I don't even remember exactly what it was, but it's just something where, you know, like that, where Richard Dawkins basically puts it as the God does not explain anything, and everything, you know, suffices without God. And that was my moment where I'm like, oh, okay, I'm an atheist, you know. And but by that time I was pretty much done. You know, there was very little chance of me ever going back to Mormonism, I don't think. And part of it for me, though, is that like I never liked church, you know, because this is the thing. You can tell, like, John DeLynn liked church. You can tell he did. Because he would have been a stake president in church. You can tell that John DeLynn probably liked all the things about church that I
never
hate.
fit into church.
Yeah. Church was always boring. I never liked it. It was always boring. And I always wanted to do more reading and research on my own, you know. Like that was another one of my little moments was in the MTC. When I went into the MTC, I had ordered a bunch of books to do research on. And one of the books I bought at the BYU library, I bought Religions of the World, which was a BYU course book about religions of the world.
I took an institute class that was that title.
Oh yeah, it might have been that book. I don't know when it was, a new edition. But I brought it with me to the MTC, and so one day I'm in class and I pull out all my books, and my MTC professor says, "What's that?" He's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "It's this book about religions of the world." He's like, "No, that's got to go."
I brought a bunch of books about the religions of Mexico on my mission. I had to get rid of them too.
Yep, no, that's got to go. Yeah, you know, that's exactly. I read the Book of Mormon one time, entirely on my mission, but I read Jesus the Christ twice.
That's part of the problem with Flip and I is we are painfully curious. You know, like
yeah.
I really don't like Michel Foucault. I've read probably 8 or 9 books of Michel Foucault. not many people who read that much Foucault, and I hated every second of that. And we spend time with the stuff that we don't like. We get curious. We get painfully curious about it. And I don't know.
One example out of a million of these is like when Ferguson happened. When Michael Brown died and Ferguson happened. And there was this movement and everybody was on Facebook and everybody yelling about police are murdering young black men willy-nilly, all this stuff. And I was like, oh my God. And then I immediately went into a giant deep dive on it. And I have watched every bit of police body cam shooting incident. I've read the entire Michael Brown report, like, and a million other things. Like I read the trial transcripts of Trayvon Martin. I have gone into this, you know, and it drives me crazy because I get into these arguments with people now where I say, you know, like Michael Brown didn't have his hands up and it was not in an act of surrendering with his hands up when he was shot. And they act like I'm crazy. And then it just, you know, and it's just this where it's like, you never even looked. You never even looked. 5 minutes. 5 minutes is all it takes for you to find out that story is not true, which is not to say that everything's fine. But
and 2 different DAs found out it wasn't true. Yeah, and a DA even ran on finding the truth about it. And after getting elected, came out and said, okay, it's not true.
Yeah. You know, but just that. So I dug into it. I was like, oh my God. Well, I mean, another example of this was that when Trapped in the Closet, the Scientology episode of South Park ran. Like that show ran at 10 o'clock. I was still awake at 7 a.m. reading through Scientology documents that I had downloaded off of WikiLeaks.
Flip got crazy about Scientology for a while.
I got crazy about it. Yeah.
The part of the thing of all this too, a part of what we've been through and saw, we're kind of on the front lines of watching every single moment of it, was the atheism movement and how that atheism movement blew up.
Yeah.
And we were big fans, both of us, of The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. We were right there watching as all that stuff fell into purity spiraling. And we've just been around the block, you know, kind of with a lot of stuff, both of us, and we were both right there, just kind of looking at it.
Yeah.
And,
okay, so that gets flipped out of the church, and then I guess Chris already summarized a lot of your guys, because that was paralleled a little bit. Is there anything else you want to add, like how you were obviously on board with the atheism ex-Mormon stuff at some point, and then you just kind of gradually
we both still like John Larson's Mormon Expression.
Yeah, Mormon Expression podcast is still the best ex-Mormon content, hands down, easy peasy.
Yeah,
John Larson
that's
from
given what
12
you
to 10 years
listened
ago.
to. Have you listened to RFM much lately, or
No,
at all?
very little.
I listened to little bits of them.
So I've
RFM's
only
kind of
listened-
been a blind spot for me. Yeah.
So I haven't listened to all of his stuff. By the time I like he feels balanced to me when he's on Mormonism Live, and I liked him on there. But eventually, I didn't find it useful to spend my time there, and so I just kind of got out of the habit of watching it. But I liked him a lot because I felt like he didn't really insert his opinions very much. He would just stay basically to what he found out, or
That's what we loved about Larson back then.
Okay.
We had no idea what his politics were.
Yeah, he was really good at because for example,
it sounds like what
he
you're
had-
trying to say about Larson is kind of how I feel toward RFM. I feel like RFM does a really great job.
I'm sure,
Yeah.
but that
No,
part of the reason we don't know RFM and all those other guys is because we got to a point maybe 10 years ago where we kind of fell away from watching every single ex-Mormon podcast.
There's not enough time in the world. There's too much.
And then,
Well,
we even stopped. We didn't care so much anymore. And then there's been this new interest as we come back that there's almost been this flip that the Mormon side, the apologists like the Midnight Mormons, know more of their arguments than they know of their arguments.
Yeah.
There's been this reversal that's happened.
No, there's also just this
except
thing
for
about
a lot of
eventually
people.
you've heard it.
Right.
Eventually, you've basically heard it all. You know, that's the other thing where like I don't really listen to it all that much because like I don't need to hear another takedown of Joseph Smith and
we see the Kinderhook plates. We've heard 5 podcasts on the Kinderhook plates.
You know, and every once in a while something new comes out because that's where I'm at with Scientology, where it's like I emptied the internet of everything it had to say about Scientology, and you know, then I'm in a couple of groups where they will talk about news, and that's kind of where I'm at with Mormons. It's the same thing where it's like I basically emptied the internet. The reason we're here though is again because like John DeLynn and Larson, you know, they asked for comments, we gave it to them, and then they treated us like shit for it.
One of the things I would say that differs, I promise you this differs us from all activists and even those guys, is like we have an endpoint. We're not going to be in this forever because we're trying to make money or a living off of it or any sort of thing like that. And like if they said, oh hey, we get your point on that, we probably back off of them.
Exactly.
We don't have like an eternal like growth model. We're going to keep pushing this forever and ever. You know, we're not. Just there's any sort of point or we accept apologies. Like if Larson said, "Oh yeah, I remember that night."
Okay,
you know, let it go. You know, it's we're not like I said. I don't advertise my podcast out. It's just there for people who kind of see the same thing and want to hear some solidarity in it.
Yeah,
and I don't even want to advertise it out.
We're doing the same thing that everybody else is doing. Is we want like-minded people to know you're not crazy.
Yeah.
Like, if John DeLynn feels a lot like church, you're not crazy.
Yep.
DeLynn, like I didn't have much complaints about DeLynn up through his excommunication, and then he's just started. My original thing that I was pointing at DeLynn about, because originally we came out with Larson because Larson was doing the woke stuff more than we thought. DeLynn, even though he weasels it in, but we don't think DeLynn's a true believer. We kind of just think he's just a guy who goes along with anything that sounds good to his audience. But DeLynn, what started irritating me about DeLynn was stuff about him signaling one way. Well, I don't want to bring it up, but we know he had accusations, and then he goes the other way on due process. So I made this episode, the only episode that's gotten a ton of views on my thing, where I point out some of his double speak on that, where he says, believe all women except for the women that accuse me. And then part of one of the things that I point out in that whole angle is that my liberal view of due process, by the end of it, I say is you got to take this from a point of it's a he said, she said situation. You can't make a decision off of that. So it's ultimately defending the
back before
defending him more than left-wing identitarians will defend.
Back before I was banned from that group too, I got in a big flame war on Lindsay Parks on feminist Mormon housewives during that exact time for advocating for due process. And they all hated me for that.
So we're defensive of DeLynn for his due process, but then he also comes right out and puts out these things about Kavanaugh and that sort of stuff. And that's the things we pointed at.
We want the same thing for Kavanaugh as we want for John DeLynn, but John DeLynn does not want the same thing for Kavanaugh.
You give to Kavanaugh what we give to you.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I remember when that was all happening, and I had similar thoughts running around that. Like,
and see, and I can remember back in the Mormon Expression days. Because, you know, that was when Lindsay was starting to really ramp up the feminism critical stuff. And there was a few times that John Like he wouldn't come right out and attack feminism, but he zinged feminism. He zinged them.
He'd zing allyship. Too.
Yeah, he'd zing allyship, and he kind of hinted
Like
at the
you
fact
can't
that this,
be
like,
an ally.
Yeah.
They won't ever let you be an ally, or it's a
just a
way
few
to
things where, like, you
corral
can tell.
people by using this ally stuff, and that was Larson.
But
Yeah.
like I don't imagine him doing something like that now.
No. Now he's gone all the way.
All right, let's get into some of the stuff we were talking about before we started recording. So one of the things that I wanted to bring up is how we have like a certain intent of when you're creating content or anything. Like, so you have an intent. How do you make it? Shoot, I lost the word for it. Productive, but that's not the word.
Productive.
Effective. Yeah.
Well,
effective.
like
So,
we're so. I mean, we just barely started. I've got like 130 subscribers. Our views get like 200, 300 every once in a while. Something more close to over 500 or something like that. We're not making major waves. So at some point, all we're doing is just appealing to like-minded people, like Flip said, like saying, "Hey,
okay,
you're not
is that a
crazy. You can come
problem?
listen here."
Right? Like, is it a problem to just?
I don't think it's a
reinforce your
problem when.
ideas?
Well,
I
no,
think
it's
I
a
don't think it's a
problem, but it's
problem
not-
right now when we're such a minority.
It's a
community.
problem, but
Like,
it's not a problem of our making. We're talking in our podcast to our little community because we have been thrown out of the broader community.
Yeah, that's true.
Like they put
I don't feel
us
like I've been
here.
thrown out, but I definitely okay, so when you're in the church, you feel like there are just some things you can't say out loud, right? And I
Yeah.
definitely feel that in ex-Mormon spaces, where unless I have a pretty solid relationship with someone, there are just certain things that I avoid talking about or saying, because I'm like, if they know this about me, they're going to assume this about me, which is not true, and then they're not going to want to be around me. And if I care about developing a relationship like that, like, however, I have been shocked at how little politics really matter. Like, I've made a bunch of ex-Mormon friends, and they're awesome, and that's kind of gotten me to this place where I'm like, maybe what we think we know is really a lot less important how we act in the world, right? Like, I don't know.
I absolutely think a ton of them are like, I don't think people are dumb in any way, shape, or form.
Right. Well, neither do I.
I think it's actually an exceptionally smart community. The whole ex-Mormon world. It's just they have blind spots. Like we all have blind spots.
Well,
but
I've had people admit to me certain things that they would not say when all of the whole group is together. I've had people admit stuff to me because they know I claim to be conservative. Only I basically I leave it there. I don't actually get I don't usually talk about the specific things that I'm saying as conservative. And generally, when I say conservative, I mean I'm skeptical of critical theory. That's one of the things I feel like makes me conservative, even though
but that's
I'm
not
actually
true.
okay. I'm actually okay with.
Flip and I might be called far-right extremists or something like that, and we're probably more liberal than you are.
Yeah,
both of
maybe
us.
that's very possible, actually.
No, it's not possible. It's 10,000 times
probably
have
true.
I been told that I'm a Trump-loving conservative, all this other crap. Like, I mean, I joke that I'm a far radical centrist. But
that actually have had that thought that maybe being this middle road is also another way to be like, I'm better than these liberals or these conservatives. Like, I'm in the middle, so I'm better. Like, you have the same tribal issues no matter where you feel like you fit. But
I honestly, I mean, everybody at some level it's about themselves, but I honestly don't think it's about me. Like, I think to be in our spot, you kind of have to don't care if people think you're good, because a lot of people are going to think you're bad.
But you do need like community, like on every level. Like
my community is not that community.
Humans don't thrive.
I have other communities, and I think a lot of ex-Mormons should be looking for other communities. I have other communities that don't have anything to do with Mormonism, ex-Mormonism.
This is the thing where John Larson has kind of flipped back again, because remember, there was a time after, like, kind of his last messages from Mormon Expression, and then he did a couple like Sunstone things, and his whole message was leave ex-Mormonism.
Yeah.
Like, but now he seems to have kind of sklurped right back in and said, well,
most of the friends I make, that's their goal too. they kind of want to be supportive for people that are in the thick of it and they're going through all that like turmoil of when you write, when you leave, but they're really like, I really would rather not talk about it. Can we go play some games now? Like that's the feeling that I get from most of the gatherings I go to.
Yeah,
That's
see,
great.
that thing is like, because I've been out so long that like for me it's just like, oh, okay, like it doesn't fill my mind like it did, for a lot of years afterwards.
Flip here ran a thing downtown Salt Lake called Sunday Breakers, and it was basically almost kind of like a Sunday, sort of like ex-Mormon church, breakers for
kind of
breakfast.
worked out that way,
and he had a ton of people, ton of people, just always coming to it and always coming out. And these weren't the subjects we talked about. Sometimes it was off into soccer, sometimes it would flip into this, but it was just people talking, and usually Flip, once again, to defend what he says about his diversity, he was carting us off to some weird restaurant of some weird ethnic food to have us all go try it out, and because Flip lives in that world like people wouldn't even understand. I do too, on a level, because I live in Spanish most of the time of my life. My girlfriend's Venezuelan, and I've worked in Spanish for the past 5 years. But Flip, that's kind of one of the things that Flip and I sneer at, is they by these identitarians, we get called certain things and they have no idea how involved in ethnic world we are. But the level of it is that we've kind of tried to make that community, and even that Flips thing kind of started falling apart because people got at each other's throats as soon as the current day,
politics.
Politics
it's a new religion.
happening.
It really is. Like, I feel like politics have taken over what is most important, and it bothers me. It is really hard to maintain a group of people that you don't have something in common, and I think that's what generally the secular world is lacking. Like, there's part of me that I feel bad that I can't support some religious community because they all have to make these like claims that I can't get on board with. So I don't feel like I can go there. But I do think that the strongest argument for religion, not for God, but for religion in general, is that common thing that holds you together, like glue that holds you together. And so it's like a paradox. It's like you have a glue that holds you together, and it's a dogma basically, and you can't touch the dogma. But if you can't touch the dogma, then it becomes like this tyrannical, you can't say what you're actually thinking. So it's just, I don't know how to solve that problem.
Many evolutionary psychologists have gotten into this. You got who was it was talking about the Jainism that I forget his name, but Jeffrey Miller was talking about how maybe religion was a cork that kept this extra political violence that Nietzsche and Dostoevsky predicted since forever ago, that as soon as you get rid of the religious religion, it all becomes political religion, and that's just how it goes. But then you could always point back and say, well, then the religious religion got political, and it's like, yeah, it's the battle of Evermore that we're all in.
Yeah.
But,
so I don't know, it's a paradox that I wrestle with a lot, and the way that I've been moving forward.
David Sloan Wilson, sorry, that's another evolutionary psychologist.
Okay. Well, yeah, and so the way we've been acting out how we've been going about our lives is like, well, we live in a LDS community, and my girls and my kids are friends with the neighbors, and they invite them to keep going to church and activities, and they have yet to actually want me to go to church with them, so we haven't gone to like a church service. I have, because I had a neighbor invite me because she was speaking at church, but my kids, they want to go, and I think it's probably because some of the messaging they're getting at their activities. And then when I ask them, like, well, do you want to go to church tomorrow? And then they're like, nah. Like, so they just don't. So I'm willing to support my kids. I'm not willing to drag them there because I had this argument with my brother, because he's wondered, like, are you living off of their work? Like, you're not helping support this thing that's a good thing, and you're not working for it. But I struggle with that.
Some of the I don't know, like because Jordan Peterson's religion, right? Because he's a fascinating guy because he talks about God and believing in God. But like Chris Hanna points out, is that Jordan Peterson doesn't say anything about God that an atheist couldn't affirm. And so like, because that kind of religion is a religion that makes as much sense as anything. But nobody but weirdos like Jordan Peterson treat religion like that. The reality is that most believers are literal believers, and they're not looking at it in all these Jungian archetypes.
Yeah, so
forms and
Jacob Hansen, I mean, I see eye to eye with Jacob Hansen on a lot of stuff, but he takes Peterson's exact words and falls to the it's all true religion, you know. I can take his exact words and fall to the side of like, well, let's take this from a purely atheistic view.
Yeah.
And there's definitely a lot of those concepts, but like I said, part of what I'm up here defending, I've said from the beginning, is sometimes I'm defending beliefs that aren't necessarily my beliefs. Like I said, part of the caricatures that Larson and DeLynn make are caricatures against my family. And I'm the black sheep. I'm the one who's out of the church. And people say like Mormonism isn't like a perfect fit for some people. I know, I got out. But there's a bunch of people in Mormonism who it fits like a glove for, and they got great little lives, and they're good little people, and they're busting their butts and doing everything right. And it doesn't seem to be affecting any of them in that negative way. Maybe it's happened to some of them that I don't even know about. But my parents who are glued to MSNBC all day, and my dad's a state patriarch, and my older brother who's glued to NPR all day and works at Domo or whatever, and they live this NPR Mormon life. They are not what DeLynn and Larson describe, and so I come out defending what they are, not what I am. And then there's another level where they're mischaracterizing or strawmanning what conservatives or libertarians believe, and they strawman it hard. And some of those beliefs that they strawman aren't my beliefs, but I come out and say, no, that's not their beliefs, and they get mad at me for that. You know?
Well, like actually, I had a friend, and I was bringing up your channel, and she went and she looked it up, and she's like, "Oh, aren't those guys like incels and what else did she say? Incels and the QAnon people?"
Incel, but QAnon. No, we are not QAnon.
Yeah,
right.
No, that's what like they've done research on this that shows that Democrats are
more likely to know more about QAnon.
More Democrats are more likely to have heard of QAnon than Republicans.
And of course, that was like a year ago. Who knows how many more people have heard about QAnon?
So, did you ever take the political compass test?
Me? No.
Yeah, because
should I do it and then put my results up?
Yeah, it's fun. Because like
political compass, is it accurate? Does everybody feel like it's accurate? Like, so if
I think it's a pretty good test. I think
what's the website for that?
If you just do political compass,
you just Google it.
You can screen share it on. It's a fun live podcast.
Shall we do it? You keep talking and I'll go.
But because like so on the test, I am because it's a 2-axis test. I'm like halfway from the bottom to the center, and like 1 click to the left. So I'm a freedom-loving moderate, basically, But technically, I'm on the left. Like Chris points out correctly, I'm conservative in that I believe in conserving liberalism in the face of a far left.
That's how we're both. We're conservative of 90s liberalism.
Yeah.
All right. Should I take this test here? Yeah. Okay. So
it's pretty long, but go for it.
It takes like 5 minutes, doesn't it?
It's multiple pages, but yeah, you can do it.
It's not super long.
We might cut it out. All right.
Let's see. Right where I said it.
Yeah. So I'm like.
That's exactly what I said you'd be.
I was 1 click down and 2 clicks to the left of you when I took this.
I was exactly where you are, just like 2 clicks down.
But we were. That's funny. So see, now we found our own little echo chamber, and we can say how right we are and how wrong everyone
is. We're libertarians.
But at the same time, too, some of the stuff we go saying and we get like salty about, people assume that we're way, way, way down to the other side of that thing, and we're not.
Well, it's because you're not spending your time criticizing that.
I kind of missed it, but did somebody actually tell you that Chris and I are QAnoner types?
No, yeah. What it was is I mentioned how I had been chatting with Chris, and then I told her the channel, and she went and looked at it, and that meme, that one no face meme or whatever you were calling it.
The NPC meme. They thought the NPC meme was a 4chan
meme. She thought that. Yeah, she thought that because that came from 4chan, therefore.
That is a mainstream meme. It probably started in 4chan.
Yeah, nothing will dispel you about what 4chan's about.
I think that's why she said it. But didn't you guys also say that that's what you got lambasted for as well in the?
Oh yeah, no. Everybody assumes that I'm a far right, Trump-loving conservative, God lover, all this stuff. It's really amazing how wrong they are.
But that's just what comes out as soon as we push back on anything like this. And no, we're not QAnon. We're not. But at the same time, too, I know some like I could defend some QAnon guys. I know a couple QAnon guys, and I also think that people misrepresent those guys and get overly freaked out about who they are too, and how they're making sense of the world, and how they've got some things that they're. Of course, it comes out weird and wonky, but it has an underlying substrate to it that they should try to understand better than just demonize and freak out about.
No, it is funny that like at the same time that the whole Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell thing was going on, that you're a wacko if you talk about the idea that there is like child sex trafficking going on and high level people are involved. Like that's the steel man of QAnon. Like, but you know, all the weird details.
And then there's the other level of it too, is thinking about it pragmatically. Is there people who think that the system is kaput, and so then they have this kind of like imaginary built up thing that like maybe somebody's going to come in and save it. But the underlying substrate of that is that they just do not trust. They do not trust the institutions anymore, and it's the institution's fault that they don't.
Yeah.
Well, that was fun. We'll have to maybe do a redo, because what I want to get to the bottom of is being critical of John DeLynn, like he is critical of the church. Is it even useful? That's kind of where I wanted to go. Like your intent, I think. I don't know. I have the same intent, but I don't know that it's. I don't know that it's helpful to just play the same game they're playing. Like I wonder if there's a better game we can be playing, and it kind of segues into like 3 practices, for example, and try to understand where people are at.